So welcome back. This is Night Flight, and today's guest, of course, is Wayne McRoy. And yeah, last time we talked about Lemuria, and today it will be Atlantis. And Wayne, before we jump into our conversation, I have to tell you something, because while I was preparing for this interview, something, yeah, let's say unusual happened to me. I was standing under the shower washing my hair, and out of the blue, a sentence popped into my head. And the sentence was, Atlantis was in Africa. And I was standing there thinking, I started rationalizing it away. I told myself, yeah, well, you have paid a lot of attention what is going on in Kenya. And it's probably because of that. Next thing I know, I stumble on a video by, he was interviewed, I guess, by Joe Rogan. And his name is Jimmy Corsetti. And he actually, the entire interview was about, yeah, that Atlantis was in Africa. In fact, the Eye of the Sahara and Mauritania. And that was really surprising. And I'm not saying I'm having visions, I'm a psychic or something like that. No, 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 no. I have sometimes weird dreams, and sometimes, yeah, fully formulated sentences pop into my head where I have no idea where that is coming from, because it doesn't have anything to do with the line of thought that I had before. And yeah, and that is how the extent of the mysteriousness that I experience. So what do you say?
Okay, well, that's an interesting thought to emerge, and there are people that have speculated onto where exactly it is Atlantis did exist. Now, according to the secret doctrine of the mystery schools and the occult fraternities, Atlantis actually existed in the heart of the Atlantic Ocean, and the land masses looked different during this epoch. And at one point, the continent of Africa was connected to the continent of America when Atlantis ruled the world. So there may be some validation to that thought. And this is according to the secret doctrine. So you do have to take a lot of this stuff with a grain of salt, because we really can't prove nor disprove it. But what they claim is the land masses have shifted and changed between these epochs, because as they teach, during these different epochs of time, the thing that really happens is cyclical in nature. And there's always a type of cataclysm which wipes out the old version of mankind, or the old race of mankind, and some remnant remains and then transcends to the next level. And this is how they teach it in their secret doctrine. So Atlantis connected these land masses of Africa and America at one point, according to what they said. Now, Atlantis itself was a vast continent, and it was a worldwide empire of sorts, according to what they teach. And it had infiltrated throughout all the world, had great trade relations. And this was back in what they call the Golden Age, or the time of the Saturn period. And this kind of a thing, when you look at that, this whole notion of a golden age in the past. So this is what they teach, this culture, and this was a sub-race of the Atlantean races that achieved this golden age. So it was a very powerful and technologically advanced culture. And what had happened is, over the course of time, the island continent wasn't really an island per se, it was the actual continent itself, began to sink under the waves through the course of time. And the familiar story that we have of Atlantis in the mainstream, coming from those scholars of the past, coming from the accounts of Plato and others, tells us the tale of the last remnant of Atlantis, which was an island called Poseidonus. And this is what the familiar story of Atlantis is. This island, this last remnant of Atlantis, sunk beneath the waves catastrophically overnight. And they claim it was 60 some million people that were killed in this deluge, but there was a remnant that went out to different parts of the world. And this is what developed into our modern race of mankind, according to what they teach in the secret schools. So there may be some validation to portions of Africa being a part of that. And certainly Manly P. Hall talks about that in his book, The Secret Destiny of America, how at one time the African continent and the American continent were linked together. And that's why we have pyramids here in Central and South America and pyramids in Egypt, because it was the same culture that built these and was divided by this catastrophe, by this cataclysm that happened. And that goes down in the record books of the secret schools as being one plausible explanation here. So people have made the connections to Africa, and certainly we see the remnants of what is said to be the Atlantean civilization in Egypt, and that's the conduit through which it's come into the modern area. Actually predating Egyptian culture too, going back into Chaldea and the Babylonians and things like that. We could see all these different remnants of the Atlantean culture according to the scholars within the occult fraternities. They talk about this stuff in very many books, and I would recommend, there's a book by I'm blanking here. There's a book from the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor that was written by Dr. A.S. Raleigh, and I can't think of the name of it, but he talks about Atlantis in the Secret Doctrine and what these teachings were and where all of these different races and sub-races arose from. I can't think of the name of the book, though. I'm blanking. I read so much stuff, it's hard to keep it all straight. But Dr. A.S. Raleigh, you could look him up. He's a great resource for learning a lot of this stuff. And he comes from the school of thought of the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor, which is an organization that has permeated throughout all of modern occultism and has had a lot of influence in other schools of thought, in Freemasonry, in the OTO, in all of these other groups that have come to prominence in the modern era when you're talking about the occult and the secret society groups. So he's had an awful lot of influence. The things he writes are very clear and concise and gives you what's known about this secret doctrine in pretty plain text. This isn't something that they usually do, but Dr. Raleigh went ahead and did that. I mean, he wrote this stuff down in plain layman's language for people to understand. So that is a service that that man did provide for us in the modern era. So I always recommend, if you find anything from that this guy wrote, go ahead and read it. It's pretty plain. It gives you a good understanding of what is taught throughout these secret schools, regardless of whether you think it's true or not. That's not the important point. Whether you think it's true or not, what you need to understand is there's people in positions of power in this world that very much believe in these things, and the things they do to act upon their beliefs will affect all of us. So that's why it's imperative that we know what it is that they think they know as a fact. So these things that they teach, it's important we understand them, because that, first of all, reveals to us what's their motivation, why do they do the things they do, and to another degree, how do they do the things they do. And that's why it's important we look at this stuff. And certainly we see across the board through all the secret society groups, through all the occult fraternities, this belief in this prior civilization of Atlantis. And they teach something entirely different than what we're taught in our history books in school. They have a secret history that they claim to have documented through the course of time, that they keep hidden within the secret society groups. And this is the accurate and true history of the world, according to them. And it's different than what is taught in the mainstream. So those are a lot of big ideas to look at. And there's also another crossover, and I actually covered this in a broadcast I did a couple months back. There's something known as the Atlantis of the Sands, a lost civilization in the desert in Africa, which is an interesting crossover point. So we have all of these different connections there to Africa, just to put that out there for you, since you were interested in knowing about that. There certainly is a connection there.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. It doesn't really matter what we think about all these things that they wrote down. As you said, the important point is they believe it and they have the means to act on it. And it's very important for us to understand that Because the time where you can say, yeah, I don't believe it, hence it will not affect me, that's over. Because it will
Absolutely.
affect you.
It does. It affects all of us, whether we want to acknowledge that or not. You could, just brush it away as nonsense all you want and think, oh, that's nonsense. That doesn't affect me. Well, guess what? It does affect you because, like I said, there's people in positions of power in this world that very much believe in these things and they act upon their beliefs in these things. And what they do affects us, whether we like it or not, just because of how they've positioned themselves in the power pyramid of this world. So it all trickles down. We see this all the time, this top-down control system that they've snapped into place, and they're continuing to snap into place. And it all aligns with this secret doctrine, and that's the point here. This is important, and it underlies everything going on in the world. They believe in a secret doctrine that is not public knowledge. It's only known by those in the occult fraternities and taught to only those at the highest, most levels of many of these occult fraternities and secret society groups. And the things they teach are the core of where all these things like racism in the modern era and everything derive from. It's wherein these teachings come from. It's within this secret doctrine. And they think what they're doing is they're forcing their hand. They're forcing man to spiritually evolve to the next level in human evolution by traumatically initiating the masses into this secret doctrine. And we see this translates in all sorts of things that happen on the world stage that are traumatic events, wars and catastrophes, and things like 9/11 and things like the COVID scam they pulled. These are all traumas, and this is based upon their initiation rituals and initiation processes that they push and promote. Which, by the way, after having done a thorough study on this, the initiatory rites and rituals they perform in these secret society groups are what I refer to as a synthetic initiation. It's artificial, it's man made, it's something that is the inversion of what the natural process of initiation is. When you understand initiation, what this really truly is in the natural sense of things, it's an individual path that we are all on. We're each individuals. We learn in different ways and we come to spiritual knowledge and we come to experience in our own unique way. So everybody's initiatory process should be different in the natural realm of things. Well, what the secret society groups and occult fraternities have done is they've gone ahead and they've designed a one size fits all initiation rite and ritual for everybody. This isn't how it works. That's not how the alchemical process works. That's not how the old alchemical or natural science path works. It's experiential, it's individual. Each one comes to a knowledge of things and spiritual growth on their own accord, of their own path. Well, what they've done is they've made a one size fits all initiation rite that they put all of their members through. And this is a form of synthetic initiation, and there's something missing therein. There's a spiritual component missing. So they replace that spiritual component with an artificial component that doesn't belong there, and that steers everybody into the same way of thinking. It's the whole notion of a predecessor form of creating a hive mind of sorts, if you want to get down to the brass tacks of what it is. They want everybody to think in the same ways, to react in the same ways, to believe the same principles that they believe, and uphold the objectives of the organization. In fact, these people swear blood oaths of allegiance to these secret schools, and therein lies part of the problem. So they swear to keep the secrets from the quote unquote profane, that's you and me, that's anybody that doesn't belong to the secret society. And in the same token, they also swear these blood oaths to help one another and to uphold the standards and the agendas of the secret society. So this is kind of steering people in one accord in a certain direction, and that's to submit themselves to the will of the organization itself. Now, this, like I said, is a synthetic form of initiation. That's not how it's supposed to work. But they've done this, and they've hijacked many of the old secret teachings and many of the old natural sciences and hidden them away behind the veil for those outside of the fraternities. So what they've done is they've hijacked this process and inverted it from the natural process thereof and weaponized it against humanity at large. So in so doing, what they've done is they've distorted many of these old sciences and many of these old pieces of information that they've hidden from us. And through the course of time, they become more perverted and inverted. And then we wind up with what they promulgate today as the secret doctrine. And underlying all of this are these different racial ideas based in these old concepts like Atlantis and Lemuria and the ancient races of mankind. So, what they've done with this is they have promulgated the idea and the notion that certain racial groups of mankind are superior spiritually to others. And therefore, if that's the case, they're helping the lower races to achieve this next level and to step up by forcing them through these traumatic initiation rituals of their own design. By the way, that goes against the natural. So you see how perverted and inverse the thinking at the topmost levels of this power pyramid become. So these dark occultists who run things in this world, the ones at the tops of these systems, are doing that, and they have their lower level members within these occult fraternities thinking they're actually doing something good by forcing man to take this initiation rite and therefore either ascend spiritually and evolve to the next level of humanity, or to be left behind and culled. And thus we have the great culling, and all the eugenics based ideas and everything are all wrapped up in this. And it all comes from this secret doctrine. And of course, Atlantis is one of the stepping stones through this secret doctrine to where we get into the modern era. So I don't know what you would like to add to that, or where you want to go from there.
Does this have to do with these so-called root races that we also find in Theosophy, and yeah, we also find it with Rudolf Steiner.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it is. This is like one of the core tenets of the secret doctrine that has so much political influence in today's world, because it is based in these root race ideas. Whereas there are certain root races of mankind that are somehow spiritually more elevated than others, and that it's their duty to pull them up, these lower races, into higher spirituality so that we can all ascend to this next level in human evolution. And by the way, in the eyes of those pushing this agenda, the next phase of human evolution comes through a little philosophy known as transhumanism. And this is where we're at today. They're pushing this notion to becoming what they call the post-human, and they're pushing for the post-human era in which all mankind will spiritually ascend into this next form of self-guided evolution of mankind. It's the same old ideas, just with a technological spin on it today. So this old idea of apotheosis, or the achieving of godhood through this advanced learning, is presented to us in terms that are kind of more accepted in our more technological culture today. So they've taken these ideas of technology, and they think that man merging with his technology and using his technology to bring about this self-guided evolution is the next step in human evolution, and that we will become godlike in that transcendent type of way of thinking. Problem is, there's a lot of issues wrapped up in that because they disregard the spiritual component of things.
So when you said the entire continent sank, wouldn't that mean that it could be found somewhere on the ground of the ocean?
That's what many have theorized. And of course, we've all heard about Bimini, the islands of Bimini off the coast of the U.S. here, wherein, was it Edgar Casey supposedly had seen in visions that's where Atlantis is. And there's been a lot of speculation to this, but it's hard to say for sure because the landforms, according to the secret doctrine, have shifted through these various epochs of time. It was even different pre-Atlantis in the Lemurian epoch. as well. They had the same kind of things going on. So when this cataclysm takes place, the land masses and the ocean shift. So things that used to be dry land are now at the bottom of the ocean, and things that used to be at the bottom of the ocean are now dry land masses. So this is what they claim. And of course, if we go looking in the oceans, I mean, they found pyramids and stuff off the coast of Japan. You remember that? Very deep in the ocean underwater. I can't remember the name of it, but I've
Yonaguni.
yeah, that's what it is. Yes, thank you.
Mm.
It escaped my memory as to what that was. But we have these evidences around the world of these different cultures and stuff beneath the ocean waves. So we can see there's been shifting of land masses at points, but it's hard to tell for sure where exactly Atlantis was directly located or where the central hub of it was. It was a vast island continent at one time. It was a very large continent that slowly, over the course of time, over the course of several thousand years, began to sink beneath the waves, according to the secret doctrine. And it's only this last portion of it, which was called the island of Poseidonis, which was like the capital or the central hub of Atlantis, that is the one that we're familiar with, that sank under the waves, according to Plato and his history given. So that being the case, that's the one that we're most familiar with and that we have the most public sources available for. But they talk about these things ad nauseum in detail within the secret doctrine, within the secret schools. You could find different variations of this tale in Theosophy and Rosicrucianism, by the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor, all these different places, Freemasonry, they all speak about Atlantis and they have very similar types of things that they say about it. You find this across the board with all these secret schools. It's the same teachings, just with a little bit of language mixed up here and there. But the main teaching is it was a vast island continent at one time. It was a worldwide culture and civilization that was trading with all other different types of civilizations around the world. They were technologically advanced and they existed in a time of a golden age. But then something happened with one of the later root races of Atlantis, wherein they started practicing black magic and dark sorcery. And this is what led to the destruction of Atlantis, according to the secret schools. So we have these different epochs of Atlantean culture that have come about according to what they say. And there were, I guess, if I remember correctly, 7 sub races of the Atlantean culture. I think it was like the 5th Atlantean sub race that was during this golden age, and then there were 2 races afterwards that began to devolve and started to use black magic and dark sorcery and stuff like that all the more. And that is what ultimately led to the destruction of Atlantis. And their traditions spread out across the world. And I think we discussed this last time, if I'm not mistaken, about where many of what they say in the modern era where the remnants of Atlantis began, and that was with the Mayan culture in Central America, and it spread out from there. Did we discuss that last time? I think we
Yeah,
did.
we did. We did. Mm. Um, yeah, I have to say Atlantis is also one of these subjects where usually you have a very clear division. You have the one side that says it's purely fictional. You have the other side that says, oh no, it was very real. And then among that group, of course, there is a heated debate where it actually was. As you said, it goes from Bimini Road to Santorini and what have you, to Africa. But because it was a worldwide empire, I would say it is highly likely that we might stumble on outposts. Yeah, like the US is exporting a lot of lifestyle culture to other countries as well. Yeah. And so I think to me it was a worldwide empire, and yes, it would be kind of interesting, to see the day when okay, here it is. Now we have the proof. But to me, that is actually not that important. I think that it did exist, But if other people say, no, 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 this is all nonsense, it is still an interesting subject because it is connected to all these secret societies and what have you. And they are all in love with it. Yeah. So, and then you have, of course, a group of people that, yeah, I would say romanticize Atlantis a little bit. Yeah, this wonderful utopian society. And then you have another group who are predominantly talking about Atlantean warlords and what have you. Would you say that Atlantis descended into a very evil society?
That's what the claim is in the secret doctrine. Like I said, at one time they were an enlightened culture and they lived during this golden age. They had free trade all across the world. They were technologically advanced, they were culturally advanced, morally advanced beings. And this is when they said was the golden age. And I think it was the red Atlanteans, I think is what they say is the sub race of the Atlanteans that achieved that during that time. But then after that, there were two sub races that arose from them that began to delve into the dark arts. And this is ultimately what led to the downfall of Atlantis, according to what the secret schools teach. Now, like you said, there's always argument from people. They could say it's total nonsense. They could say there's, historical accuracy to what's taught in the secret schools. Doesn't matter. Either way, the important thing present is this archetype that is ever present in the human mind that affects the human unconscious mind in ways that we barely perceive on a conscious level. So the archetype is there, it's ever present, it's this air of mystery about it. I think we all intrinsically know. We really don't know much about our past, do we? We
No.
only know what we're told in our history books, and we know a lot of that is incorrect. They make a lot of assumptions. They even assume the age of the earth, regardless of which side of the aisle you come from. If you come from the creationist side of things, well, they claim the earth is only, 6 to 9,000 years old or something like that. If you go the other extreme, the evolutionary people and the ones teaching the Big Bang Theory and all this, they say the earth is like 4 billion years old or something like this. Neither one has any actual evidence or proof to back that up. Any claims they make in regard to that are based upon assumptions and beliefs, and only assumptions and beliefs. Even though the scientific side will say, well, we can carbon date stuff. Well, there's a lot of problems with carbon dating. You're making assumptions even using that. You're assuming that the atmosphere of the Earth was the same, how many ever millions of years ago, as it is today, in order to make that assessment with carbon dating. So even the tools they claim to date things or to age things are incorrect, and all of that's based upon an idea that was put forward by a guy named Lyell back in the late 1700s. And that's what we know today as the geologic column. Are you familiar with that at all, as far as the age of the Earth is concerned and stuff like that? The geologic column, this is how they determined how old things that they find, fossils that they find, are when they're buried in the ground. Now, how do they do that? Well, they use circular reasoning and circular logic for this. This guy, he was a Scottish lawyer, by the way, and he was also what he called a naturalist later on in his life. And he made some observations and he came up with numbers out of thin air based upon what strata of rock things, fossils, and stuff were buried in as to how old they were. So that's how they determine oftentimes, well, how old is this dinosaur fossil? Well, it's 100 million years old. Well, how do you know that? We know because of the layer of the strata of the earth, what kind of rock and dirt and stuff we found it in, how old it is. Well, how do you know how old that dirt is? Well, we know it based upon the fossils we find in it. Do you begin to see the problem yet? This is how they actually set this up. It's all based upon the ideas of this one guy. He said arbitrarily, okay, if you dig down 8 feet, that's 6,000 years or something like that, we'll just say, for argument's sake. I don't know how he came up with his numbers, but this is pretty much it, out of thin air. So he says, if you go down 12 feet, that's a million years back. And whatever fossils you find there are that many years old. So this is the chart that they use to base this on. And this has never been demonstrated anywhere in the world, by the way, the geologic column. It's all theoretical. It can't be actually ever observed anywhere in the world where you find this stuff. But this is how archaeologists and those type of people, how they determine the age of a thing that's buried in the earth. So they use this circular line of reasoning to date things and to age things, and then they use this carbon dating process to kind of reify those belief systems, and they make those assumptions with those things based upon. And there's not much really to it. So we don't know a lot about our past. And that's the problem. And that's why things like the notion of Atlantis has been romanticized as it has by many within the secret schools. So I don't know how accurate a history the secret schools are giving us either. I do know that the history we're given in the science textbooks and stuff is obviously flawed in its way of thinking, and there's no way we could really know for sure. Same could be said with this secret doctrine, because oftentimes they will tell you things that they claim to know, but they don't tell you the source of where it came from. Same thing with our science. They'll say, well, we know this is X amount of years old because of the geologic column, but they don't address the problem with the geologic column. They make assumptions, and it's the same thing in these secret schools. And oftentimes they won't tell you where the root source of the information came from, although they claim they have passed it down from generation to generation for a very long time. And maybe they have. I don't know. I don't have all the answers to this stuff, but I do find problems and fallacies in the logic on both sides of things. But we do have this notion of older human cultures. And I think there are evidences of this in the world. And we really don't know much about them. So I think maybe there is a notion of truth to the Atlantis tales in some degree or another. Now, much of it has probably been mythologized through the course of time. And a lot of this has to do, like I said, with the archetypes that affect the human mind in many ways. So, this in and of itself is something that we can look at and decide whether or not we find value in that. Because I think the archetype is key here. We all intrinsically know, yes, humans have been here for a very long time, and we don't know much about some of the more ancient cultures. And what we do see evidences of lead back to this notion of a worldwide culture in the past that is scarcely acknowledged today. So that leads people on this search for Atlantis.
Yeah. And I would say there is, regardless of if you believe that Atlantis existed or not, there is a case to be made for a lost civilization. And when we look at, yeah, let's say Göbekli Tepe or Karahan Tepe or the other tepes that are out there, and Yonaguni, the pyramids off the coast of Cuba, and on it goes. So we, with our technology, would not be able to build the pyramids. End of story. We would not. So I would say, yeah, we certainly are, as Graham Hancock likes to put it, a species with amnesia.
I definitely agree with that statement because there's so much about our past that we don't know, we don't have records of. And think about this logically, and this is something that kind of makes sense to the secret schools version of history. If there was a vast cataclysm that happened that overnight destroyed much of the earth and much of humanity that was here, well, this would leave very little trace if the destruction was to such a degree as it's claimed to have been. So we wouldn't have any written records left. We wouldn't have anything like, say, computers or any advanced technologies like that would remain if they were buried beneath the ocean. How would we know? Think about this. If the earth shifted or something and the land masses and everything shifted, and everything that was dry land today, like where we're sitting today, if it was submerged, I don't know, say even 1,000 feet or 1,000 yards below the surface of water, how would we even find any remnants of anything if that happened catastrophically overnight? Like, think about that. And of course, we have all these flood myths throughout the course of all time and civilization and all cultures. So all of these things would make sense that it would essentially be a big reset. Okay, and they like to use the word reset a lot with many of these things. It always relates to the cataclysm idea. So if we have this great reset and everything got wiped out, we wouldn't be able to likely find a lot of remnants of that, except for maybe some vast structures carved in stone or something that's withstood the course of time, like that, some grand monument or some such thing. And isn't that what we find? We find these evidences around the world in different places, these grand monuments carved out of stone. And you could tell there had to be some type of technology at play. There had to be some type of advanced civilization that did this, because you're not going to carve that stuff with what we would consider to be conventional Stone Age tools in our modern way of thinking. And that's a lot of the problem, too. I think there's a misnomer as to what mankind has achieved through the course of the thousands of years history that we've had. Do we really think man thousands of years ago was dumber than we are today? Think about that. If anything, I think man back then was a lot smarter and more savvy and understood the natural world much better than we do today. We're so separated from the natural world today. If you take the average person in Western civilization now and send them out in the woods, there you go, survive. They wouldn't be able to. They just don't have the skills or the savvy or the knowledge of nature to do that. Now, mankind thousands of years ago, I think, was much smarter than we give him credit for. And I think he probably developed a lot of technologies that we've forgotten and we also don't give him credit for. So this is a way of thinking that's been indoctrinated into us. We think of old primitive cultures as being archaic and backwards and really doing things that we wouldn't do today. Like the common notion is ancient man, well, they worshipped the sun. They saw the sun as the god. Do you really think that mankind was really that naive? That they didn't understand that it was a natural force, it was a natural thing that happened in this system, that they worshipped maybe weather gods and they made gods out of all these things. Well, I think the mythologies and stuff we have, this personification of gods or goddesses or some such thing by ancient cultures, was just acknowledging a natural force that they recognized as being there. And in order to convey that idea to people in ways that they could understand, they were given this personification so that they could tell this in a story and convey that meaning to people, because a lot of stuff is lost in language. There's a lot of things that you can't adequately express in language. So the best way to express those is in the form of a story, because people could relate to that. That's where the notion of the archetype comes in. And that's why it's so important, because it does affect the human unconscious mind. You can relate to the archetype. You understand the archetype that can't adequately be expressed with words. And that's why something like this, like Atlantis, is an archetype unto itself, because you can't adequately express the idea with words. And we don't necessarily have the accurate description of the thing. We just have the archetype to work with. So that's why many of these mythologies and tales and stories about Atlantis have arisen, in my view.
You said not a lot of writings and scriptures would have survived. There is a line of thought that maybe some of the Atlantean knowledge survived in the Vedic scriptures, because 15,000 years ago, we had the Rama Empire. We had the huge wars at the end of the Kali Yuga with the Vimanas and so forth. And so maybe that there was, an influence or remnants of those texts could have survived, because the Rama Empire was a contemporary of Atlantis. Do you think it's possible that we might find something in the Ramayana or Mahabharata?
I guess that's possible, and I think there are always those different connections back to the Atlantean culture and that kind of thing. Even in more Western ways of thinking, I think we have the connections there. The secret doctrine does teach that some of the subraces of Atlantis toward the end did spread out into the Far East, and these were known as the Nagas, the Naga people. And I don't know if we covered this last time, but there were these different warring factions within the Asian subculture, and we had the Ramas and all of that stuff. All of these same kinds of ideas are derived from the same place, and I think this all ties back to Atlantis.
Mm. Why do you think are the secret societies so obsessed? Or isn't it an obsession? To me, it feels like it, but maybe I'm misinterpreting it.
I think it is kind of an obsession with them because what their ultimate goal is the re-achievement of this golden age idea.
Mm.
And I think they think by going back to the future, they can get there. You see, by going back to and looking at what it is that the Atlantean culture at its height was doing and the technologies they had, if they could rediscover all of that stuff, we could get back to that golden age once again. The problem is getting to that golden age, these people who believe this and have followed this way of thinking, these dark occultists at the top of the power structure, they have a very inverted and twisted picture of what this golden age should look like. And while it's a utopia for them, it's a dystopia for the rest of us that don't belong to the power base. And that's wherein the problem lies. So they're seeking to go back to the future. And of course, play on words and pun there, a very popular film here, put out in the 1980s. And none of this stuff's ever by accident. It's all programming motifs of the human mind, invoking the archetype. And certainly we see that. And we know if you go back and you study World War II, and you study the German people and the Nazi Party and stuff, they were obsessed with finding these old artifacts and stuff like that. They sent out all these missions across the world trying to find and recover these things, and I think that's what they were looking for. Were some of these lost technologies of Atlantis, which actually claimed to use a different type of energy than we use today. They used electricity. This is according to the secret doctrine. They did have electricity, but that was only a secondary form of energy they used. They used something finer and more subtle than that called ether energy, or they had a different name for it too. I'd have to go back and look at the writings to remember exactly what they called it. But essentially, it was the ether field. It was the vacuum, the quantum vacuum energy, as we would call it today, the 0 point. They were said to have utilized this in Atlantis for many of their needs. And that we hardly understand anything about this today. And I think this is one of the things that the Nazis were looking for back then in World War II, trying to find this connection back to that energy source that the Atlanteans were said to have. Now, like I alluded to earlier, Dr. A.S. Raleigh actually wrote about this in his book, talking about this history of the secret doctrine of Atlantis. He had hinted upon that source of energy that they were said to have used. And I can't remember what name they gave it, but essentially it's the same thing as what we would call ether energy today, or 0 point energy, the quantum vacuum, whatever you want to call that, this free energy source. I think Tesla was starting to tap into it too. And that's why a lot of his work was really kind of shoved under the rug in the public sector here. But certainly in the secret special access programs and stuff at the military industrial complex, they've been looking at this stuff for a long time and trying to develop these technologies. But this is a callback to Atlantis once again. And I think that's one of the things that really spurs on this fascination and this obsession with it in the secret schools. They're looking for that because that is essentially what can solve a lot of energy problems here in the world. And of course, they want to harness that for themselves, but not for the bulk of humanity, as we see. But that's wherein the problem lies. I mean, not all of these things are necessarily bad or evil on the face of it. It's how it's being used. And sadly enough, the people that are steering the direction these things are being used and developed for have dark intentions for the rest of us. So that's the problem.
Hmm. It's a little bit off topic, but I have to ask. When I think about free energy, I'm not saying it doesn't exist or it's a pipe dream. What I sometimes ponder is it a good idea to give a species like us, with our current state of consciousness, attitudes, awareness, unlimited energy for free? Is that a good idea?
Good question. I don't have the answer to that. In the eyes of the secret schools, no. And that's one of the excuses and justifications they give for hiding some of this stuff, or for ostensibly hiding some of it. Of course, they're no more, how should we say, they're no better for wielding it than the rest of us. Let's put it that way. But make no doubt about it, I'm pretty sure in this world there are some of these special access programs and dark technologies, black budget technologies that have been developed that can actually do this, generate free energy. And I think they're being used by this, what would be classified as a breakaway civilization by some. And I think there's evidence that there is this type of breakaway civilization. And many of them, of course, at the topmost levels of this, would be these dark occultists who run things in this world. They do things for different reasons than you and I would do things. They act in ways we wouldn't act because it is basically a separate type culture. And they view themselves as being more advanced than us in the evolutionary process, spiritually, physically, however they see it. I mean, their worldview is very convoluted and very much different than ours. But certainly, I think there's evidence to show that they have been able to maybe reproduce some of these technologies and maybe utilize some of the principles thereof. And of course, it always falls back to looking back to the past in order to know something about the future, because time is cyclical and civilization is cyclical in their view. So they have these different epochs of time. So maybe they do have some secret knowledge that we don't. Maybe they do know what's coming next and are preparing for it. Maybe they have a better understanding of the cycles of time than we do. Hard to say. They keep so many things hidden away, it's really hard to tell. All I know is the internet has been a very useful tool in getting a lot of their old secret writings out now. And because it is handy, many of these occultists and these people in secret society groups have decided to digitize many of these old books to make them easier for themselves to find. And the byproduct of that is researchers like myself and others being able to find this stuff on some obscure website out there and download it and read it and understand it. And I think this is a positive benefit of the internet, which, by the way, was developed as the ultimate tool for enslavement for humanity by these dark occultists who run things. But here we are. It is a tool at the end of the day, and it can be used for good or for bad. And I would prefer to use it for good. And one of the unintended consequences that they put out there into the world with this tool is the fact that now we can find a lot of this stuff. Now, as of late, they've been heavily censoring things and shadow banning things and hiding things away as best they can due to digital censorship and stuff like that. But there was this kind of sweet spot between about the year 2010 and up until about 2018 or so, where you could find a lot of this stuff online openly and freely. And now it's getting more and more difficult to find many of these things, but they're still out there. You can still find them because that's the nature of this. It leaves a digital record that's can be traced in most regards, but now you'll see they're beginning to wipe things off of the web, and we see this more and more happening, especially with the development of this next phase of the internet called Web 3.0, more commonly known as metaverse technology. And that's not just Facebook, that's not Meta. Metaverse is a term that came about before Facebook made it popular and actually blew the whole thing up for them. But that's another story entirely. People weren't happy with Facebook's take on this stuff and the whole metaverse idea. So a lot of that's probably going to look a lot different than what they originally intended, but they are still building the infrastructure thereof. And with this, we're going to see the wiping of many of these records. So I always encourage people, find PDF files, download them, keep them on a separate storable hard drive somewhere, because this stuff's not going to be found for long. And if you could get an analog physical copy of something, a real physical book, like back here, do that. And that's why I started making a lot of my transcripts available in book form too, because I want a record of this stuff to still exist generations from now.
When you say that they want to go back to the future, back to the golden age, I remember our very first interview that we did. That was about these cycles, golden age, silver age, and on and on. So I have to say, I'm not very impressed with them because they fail to understand that these are natural cycles. The golden age will come, yeah, come hell or high water. It will come, but it will not come because they demand it. It will come because the cycle is there again.
Right, that's the thing. It'll come when it's supposed to, and
Yeah.
it's going to come regardless of what they do. The thing is, a lot of these people have become so hubristic in their own way of thinking, so arrogant, that they think they can actually influence these cycles of time and change these cycles of time. Because what could be more godlike than that, than being able to change times and seasons? And the Bible even says something about that, in regards to the Antichrist. He will change times and seasons. And that's what they're intending to do. That's what they want to do. They want to be able to change the cycles of time and the season. So they want to be able to bring about this golden age in an artificial way, in an anti-natural way, by applying this inversion principle to things. And when people ask me, I always tell them the absolute true definition of Satanism is inversion. The
Yeah.
inversion process. They want to invert everything about the natural order. And if they can achieve that, that would give them control over times and seasons, these cycles of time. So they could determine and be able to themselves instantiate whatever time frame they want. So they could say, we want to step into this golden age. We can do this by using our intellect, by using our technology. And this falls back once again to this whole Luciferian philosophy, this notion that man through his intellect can become God. And once again, we always see that as being a central point for many of these dark occultists who run things, and many of these people in positions of power in this world. That's what they most certainly hope to achieve and what they want to achieve. And in their hubris, it's what they think they can achieve through the use of high technology and through the use of this transhumanist advent of things, through the process of singularity, the merging of man and machine and the merging of consciousness together into one, and being able to affect the physical natural world around him. In so doing, he seeks to build a digital sublayer of this reality. And with this digital sublayer of this reality, to control the times and seasons. And that's why we have this whole infrastructure for Web 3.0 being built, metaverse, if you will, because they want to ultimately upload mankind's consciousness into the machine and have this whole digital sublayer of this reality. This translates in things like we would think of as virtual reality technologies, augmented reality technologies. And a perfect example I could give of this is think back to the game Pokemon Go that came out some, I don't know, 10 years ago or so now. Pokemon Go, where you could take your cell phone and walk around in the real physical world and find these little Pokemon monsters on your screen. There it is, superimposed over the background of where it is. This is what's called augmented reality. This is one of the next levels they want to go to with this. So it creates this digital subspace around us wherein digital creations and real world things can interact. And they've been seeking to set this up for a long time, and this is all part of the coming infrastructure. Well, this leads directly to this transhumanist way of thinking. They want to build this entire digital sublayer to our reality for us to interact with. And at some point, it'll become indistinguishable from the real physical world here when they get more invasive with the technologies, when they implant the brain chips and these kind of things that they all have planned. Then they'll be able to completely control your perceptions of reality, and perception is reality. So therefore, they can make you experience whatever they want. So they could set up this digital sublayer to be this paradise that they want, this golden age, and they can have total control of that, be the gods of that. And essentially what this is more of the inversion process, because they've taken something that exists in the natural and they've made a completely synthetic creation that is the inversion of that. And what am I speaking about here? I think I may have hinted at this in shows past here with you. Essentially, what they're planning on doing is they're attempting to build a synthetic etheric plane layer here. Now, if you go into the cosmology of the secret schools, especially of Rosicrucianism, you find that our physical material world, there is a subplane of that called the etheric plane. And this is wherein there's a finer form of manifestation that comes. This is where things like the theories on ether technology or this 0-point energy, these kind of things are said to come from, this etheric sublayer of the natural world. And you'd have to get heavily into Rosicrucian cosmology and stuff like that to understand this. This is something I can't really explain in just a couple minutes here. It takes some time. But essentially, the whole theoretical process here, according to this, is we have this etheric sublayer to this reality that exists in the natural realm. Well, they're seeking to build a synthetic version of that in this digital world that's coming. And in doing so, this applies that inversion principle once again. So if they can cause manifestation in this digital, artificial, synthetic, etheric sublayer, it could bring about manifestation in the physical world here, because it is said through the stepping down of manifestation from the spiritual into the physical world, the etheric is an important part of this. So they're hijacking that whole process and building this digital sublayer of reality in order to bring about this changing of the times and seasons. And I know it sounds like a little bit of a sidetrack, but certainly it all relates, because this would give them control over that. And I hope I'm making sense for everybody here. I hope I didn't lose anybody.
No, I get it. I get it. My goodness, our first hour is already gone, and we are going to see the patrons on the other side. Until next time.